Hi, my name's Lottie. At my brother's wedding, my parents looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't embarrass us in uniform." I wore it anyway. That night, I was seated near the kitchen exit with no name on the chart, erased from every photo, and introduced as someone who helps out. They honored my cousin for a military tour that never left Missouri, while pretending my combat medals didn't exist. But then, my phone rang, and the Pentagon was on the other end. You ever realize your family doesn't hate you because you failed, but because you succeeded without their permission? What happens when the truth walks into the ballroom in full dress uniform? And what happens when your own mother is the one who tried to end your career before the world ever got the chance to see who you are? The envelope slid across my desk just after lunch. Thick cardstock, creamy, pretentious, the kind that felt heavier than it looked. My name wasn't handwritten, not even typed, just guessed in embossed font. But I knew what it was before I opened it. My brother Dean was getting married. Again. I sat back in my chair, the ceiling fan barely moving the stagnant summer air in my Arlington office. Outside the window, the Pentagon's south parking lot glinted like a battlefield of windshields. I peeled the seal, unfolded the invite, and read the line tucked beneath the RSVP box. Please wear neutral attire. Not a dress code, a directive, a polite muzzle. Don't show up in uniform, don't make us look bad. That's what it really said. I almost laughed. Almost. It had been 5 years since my mother last called me by name, 3 since Dean had returned a message, 2 since I stood at our father's graveside while my family stared straight past me in full dress blues. And now they wanted me there, but only if I knew how to behave. Only if I could stay invisible. I set the invitation down slowly, palms flat, elbows on either side. I wasn't even sure I was offended. I think I was just numb. The clock ticked. Eventually, I stood, crossed the room, and opened my file drawer. Tucked inside was a slim, worn folder marked personal. I hadn't opened it in years. I pulled it out anyway, flipped it open. Inside was a photo. Me, 23, freshly commissioned, standing between my parents, smiles frozen like they were performing for someone else. That was the last time my mother touched my shoulder in public. I replaced the folder and turned back to the window. A transport plane banked west over the Potomac. For a second, I wondered what it might feel like to not be needed anywhere. I left for Fredericksburg 2 days later. The drive down I-95 was blessedly uneventful. Just me, the road, and talk radio doing its best to keep me irritated. I stayed at a rental 5 miles out of town. My mother didn't offer a room. I didn't ask. The morning I was due at the house for the first family gathering, I dressed in jeans and a black blouse. Nothing military, no insignia. I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself I didn't want to cause a scene. But when I arrived, suitcase in hand, Evelyn Maddox stood at the front door like a sentry. She didn't hug me. Instead, she scanned me like I was a shipment she hadn't ordered. "You're early." "I wanted to avoid traffic," I said. She stepped aside. The house smelled like lemon polish and antique silence. Same wallpaper, same heavy furniture, same feeling that I was a guest, not a daughter. She led me into the living room. Sunlight poured through the window, landing in squares on the carpet like spotlights. She gestured toward the hallway. "You can use the guest room. Just don't unpack too much. We'll be busy." Then she turned, almost as an afterthought. "Lottie, don't wear that uniform to the ceremony." There it was. I paused, just long enough for her to notice. "Excuse me? You heard me?" Her voice didn't rise. It never did. "This isn't about the military. It's Dean's Day. I'd appreciate it if you didn't turn it into something else. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her words did all the work. She wasn't worried about the attention I'd draw. She was worried I'd exist too loudly. Later, upstairs, I opened my suitcase. The uniform was folded at the bottom, as if it had been waiting for me to remember who I was. I ran my hand over the ribbons, not to admire them, just to feel something real under my fingers. They'd rather I come dressed like a bystander than admit I served a country that asked more of me than they ever did. They didn't want a soldier. They wanted a silhouette. I sat on the edge of the bed. The house was quiet except for the occasional floor creak. I picked up the invitation from the side table again, turned it over, reread the line. Neutral attire. Like my life could be muted for aesthetic. I whispered to myself, I wasn't going to wear it, but now maybe I must. By the time the morning light filtered through the guest room window, I was already dressed. Not just dressed, buttoned, belted, and polished in a uniform they wished didn't exist. The house was quiet, as if it held its breath. I zipped up my jacket slowly, each tug of the zipper louder than it should have been in that stillness. Not out of drama, just because it mattered. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't want them to have that. Let them wonder whether I'd show up like they'd feared, like they'd warned me not to. The rehearsal dinner was held at a rustic vineyard on the outskirts of town. Picture perfect for social media. Fairy lights, mason jars, white oak chairs, all smiles and staged candids. I parked near the staff entrance, not because I had to, but because it felt fitting. As I stepped into the welcome area, a young woman with a clipboard barely looked up. Name? Lottie Maddox. She scanned her list, tapped her finger down the page, frowned. Maddox? Maddox? I leaned slightly, eyes moving to the oversized seating chart on the easel. Names were arranged in tidy blocks. Maddox appeared multiple times, Dean and Vera at table 1, Evelyn at 2, some cousins scattered throughout, but not me, not Lottie, not Major, not even guest of, nothing. Maybe check the vendor list, someone behind me muttered. I turned. A cousin I hadn't seen since we were kids. He didn't even register who I was. The clipboard girl finally pointed. Table 14, back near the sidebar. Thank you, I said. I walked away before the rage could collect itself into words. Table 14 was adjacent to the catering station. The smell of grilled lamb and roasted vegetables drifted by with every swing of the kitchen door. The linen was a shade off from the others, cream instead of ivory. There was a single votive candle flickering in the middle, surrounded by bread rolls already gone stiff. The place card said, E. Maddox. Printed, small, barely there. I sat, posture straight, mouth shut. They wanted me out of the picture. Fine, I could do that. The room dimmed, a projector whirred to life against the far wall. Someone tapped a glass. If we could all turn our attention to the screen, Dean and Vera have prepared a little walk down memory lane. Cue soft music, childhood birthday parties, Easter egg hunts, family trips to the lake. Dean grinning through every year of his life. Vera sprinkled in early, homecoming queen, college graduation. Evelyn held court in every scene, pearls tight, smile tighter. And me, nothing. Frame after frame flicked by. At first, I assumed they were just skipping the awkward years. Then I realized they were skipping me. Until one blurry image appeared. Me at 13, in braces, standing awkwardly in the background of a 4th of July barbecue. It lingered for maybe half a second, and then it was gone. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just let it pass through me like wind through an empty hallway. A soft sniffle came from nearby. Evelyn. I turned slightly and saw her dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin, whispering, "So many beautiful memories." That wasn't grief. That was theater. Beside me, a woman leaned over. I didn't know her. Middle-aged, friendly face. She gestured toward the screen, now looping images of Dean and Vera's engagement photos. "Which side are you with?" I paused, then smiled politely. "The one they pretend I'm not part of." She blinked, unsure if I was joking. I didn't clarify. The slideshow ended with a flourish, a golden filter over a posed family portrait. Dean in a tux, Vera in white, Evelyn smiling beside them, one hand resting on the shoulder of their late father. The text beneath read, "The Maddox Legacy. No footnotes, no asterisks, no Lottie." I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the empty wine glass in front of me. Let's see how long that legacy lasts without the one they buried alive. The projector screen went dark, but the silence it left behind lingered longer than the music ever had. Around me, the clatter of silverware resumed, muted, unsure. I didn't join in. I sat still, my hands resting flat on the linen, my breath measured. My name had been wiped from the narrative like an inconvenient typo. I didn't expect applause. I didn't expect an apology, but something in me still winced like I had. Maybe she looked away because she knew I wouldn't stay quiet much longer. I didn't return to the guest house right away. I needed air, and not the kind wrapped in lavender sachets and social obligation. I took a walk down the gravel path that circled the vineyard. The sun was beginning to dip, washing everything in gold, but it felt cold against my skin. My boots crunched the stones beneath me, the only sound steady enough to trust. That's when the memory crept in, quiet, uninvited. Aunt Winona had sent me a box after Dad's funeral. Old photos, letters, a few clippings from local papers where he'd been mentioned. One photo stopped me cold. It was our family at the county fair when I was 11, Dean holding a blue ribbon, Dad smiling too wide, Mom clutching her purse like it held the family's reputation. And there, in the middle, was my torso. Just my torso. My face had been cut out. Winona had apologized, said it must have been an accident. Maybe the frame cracked, she offered over the phone, her voice a little too rehearsed. But the edges of the cut were clean, straight, almost surgical. That kind of mistake doesn't happen by accident. When I finally returned to the venue, cocktail hour was in full swing. Laughter filled the corners, glasses clinked, and small talk flitted like moths in lamplight. I stood near a table of hydrangeas, sipping club soda and watching the room move around me. An older gentleman approached Evelyn. I couldn't hear his name, but he carried himself like someone who mattered, to someone. They talked briefly, then he pointed in my direction. I turned slightly, not enough to make eye contact. "Is that your daughter?" he asked her. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "She works in administration, I think, with the Pentagon, logistics or something like that. No mention of rank, no Major Maddox, not even my daughter Lottie. Just something like that." The man nodded politely, murmured something indistinct, and wandered off. Evelyn didn't even glance my way. I felt the burn, not the angry kind, but the kind you get when your skin's been rubbed raw over time. I wanted to walk across the room, stand in front of her, and ask, "Do you even remember what I do, who I am, who I've become?" But I didn't. Instead, I walked to the nearest hallway and found the restroom. Inside, everything was marble and lavender-scented. I chose the farthest stall, latched it, and leaned against the wall. I stared at the medals pinned to my chest. The fabric didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. Every stitch held a memory they never asked about. Every bar was something I'd survived alone. Eventually, I stepped out and moved to the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. Same face they'd cut out of that photo, older now, sharper. "They keep saying I'm not part of the picture," I whispered. "Maybe it's time I take the frame." I didn't cry. I didn't even feel like crying. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something cleaner, harder, like a blade that had finally cooled. I splashed water on my face, fixed my collar, and straightened my spine. When I opened the door, the sound of laughter and glasses returned like background noise in a theater. I stepped back into it without pause. From across the room, Vera looked up. Our eyes locked, just long enough. Then she looked away. I didn't need to shout to be heard. But I knew the next time I stood, the room would freeze. I stayed by the hydrangeas until the staff began ushering guests into the reception hall. The sky outside had softened to a violet dusk, casting long shadows through the big windows. Inside, the lights had dimmed. The music switched from jazzy background tunes to more formal instrumental pieces. I waited until the flow of people slowed, then made my way in, heels echoing softly against the wood floor. There was a woman in a black dress with a clipboard near the entrance. Her eyes scanned me from my boots up to my chest, lingering for a beat too long on the ribbons. "Name?" she asked, flipping through her list. "Lottie Maddox." She ran her finger down the page, paused, blinked, then reached for a sticky note. "E. Maddox," she said, scribbling it quickly and handing it to me like a claim check. "Table 14, near the service door." There was no card with my name, no printed placard, just that handwritten slip like an afterthought, as if I'd shown up without RSVPing or had wandered in off the street. I walked toward the back of the hall. Table 14 was tucked into a corner near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. I could hear the clatter of trays, the hiss of burners, the occasional bark from a chef. It was the only table without a centerpiece. The linen was slightly wrinkled, and the chair covers didn't match the others. There were no other guests there yet, just an empty breadbasket and water already starting to sweat in the glasses. I sat, careful to smooth my jacket before placing my hands on the table. One breath, then another. A man in a navy blazer sat down beside me a few minutes later, nodding politely. He looked maybe early 50s, expensive watch, the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided what they think of you. He glanced at my uniform, squinting. "You with security?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Caterers bringing extra guards tonight?" I looked at him, not harsh, not amused, just there. Before I could respond, Evelyn appeared, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to the man, then turned to him like I wasn't seated between them. "She's just helping out," she said with a light laugh. "Likes to feel involved." The man chuckled, clearly relieved that he hadn't stepped in something awkward. I sipped water. Evelyn didn't look at me when she walked away. She didn't need to. That line wasn't for him, it was for me. Likes to feel involved. Not major, not our daughter. Just someone orbiting. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. They wanted silence, so I gave it to them. But it wasn't submission. It was planning. Across the room, Vera was showing off the cake table to a group of women. She wore a dress that matched the tablecloths and a smile sharp enough to slice through the fondant. Her voice floated up over the clinks of cutlery and soft laughter. "This whole thing took 6 months to plan. Dean really wanted it perfect. I just handled the aesthetic." Perfect. That was the word that kept coming back. Their version of perfect didn't include anything messy. Nothing that reminded guests the family had fractures, especially not the daughter who wore a uniform that didn't match the floral palette. I watched as a few other guests trickled in and sat at table 14, none of them family. One was a man who seemed to know someone from the kitchen. Another was a friend of Vera's old roommate. No one seemed sure if they belonged there. Neither was I. I stared ahead, not at my mother, not at the man who'd made the joke, not at the waiters rushing by, just forward, spine straight. Let them think I was quiet. Let them believe they'd made me small. I'd learned long ago that some silences echo louder than screams. As the master of ceremonies took the mic and tapped it for attention, I reached for the champagne flute still sitting untouched in front of me. My fingers curled around the stem. Not to toast, not to sip, to prepare. Dean stepped up to the microphone like he was accepting an award. The music faded, the lights softened, and every head in the room turned toward him. I stayed seated, glass still in hand. It wasn't shaking. I wasn't shaking. He smiled that rehearsed grin he'd worn since childhood, the one that worked better on cameras than people. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "It means the world to us to have family and friends from every part of our lives joining us." He started listing them off. Our amazing mother, Evelyn, who raised us with grace and grit. Aunt Winona, who helped organize everything. My beautiful bride, Vera, who's poured her heart into this day. And my old piano teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, still the only one who could ever get me to sit still. People chuckled softly. A few turned to smile at Vera, who dabbed the corner of her eye like she'd just been handed an Emmy. I waited. Just one word. My name. A glance. Anything. It didn't come. Dean's gaze swept the room like a stage light that never landed on me. I didn't slump. I didn't flinch. I sat tall, like I'd been trained. Behind me, a waiter bumped the kitchen door open with his back, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The scent of rosemary and butter drifted by, sharp against the sterile, floral air. "And before we get to the next course," Dean continued, "we'd like to take a moment to recognize someone who's served this country with honor." My spine straightened, almost involuntarily. Finally. "We're proud to share that our cousin Jeremy," he paused for effect, "completed his National Guard service this spring. Let's give him a warm round of applause." The spotlight turned to a table across the room. Jeremy stood sheepishly, his cheeks flushed as the applause swelled. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with pride. Jeremy? 2 years of weekend drills and a desk post in Missouri? Not a word about me. Not my deployments, not the surgeries. Not the medals or the years I didn't come home for holidays because I was protecting people like them. They'd handed my story to someone else. The applause died down. Dean gave the mic back to the MC and sat down with an expression of self-satisfaction that made something inside me rise, steady, deliberate. I stood. My chair didn't scrape. My steps didn't falter. I lifted my glass, and for the first time all night, the room went still. Some people turned, curious. Others stiffened. Evelyn froze mid-sip. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "The people I serve," I said calmly, "outrank everyone in this room." Silence landed hard, sharper than any insult could have been. I let it breathe, let them sit in it. Then I set my glass down, not because I was done, but because they were. Vera's posture shifted. She looked to Evelyn like a student unsure of what came next. Evelyn didn't blink. No one spoke. No one stood. They couldn't decide if I'd made a toast or drawn a line. I sat back down. That was the moment everything tilted. Not exploded, tilted. A slow shift in gravity. People didn't laugh. They didn't clap. But they noticed, and they'd remember. The forkfuls of filet mignon that followed tasted different after that. No one made eye contact at my table. Not that it mattered. I wasn't there for a reaction. I was there because they'd pretended I wasn't. The evening kept moving. Speeches gave way to dancing. Laughter crept back in, cautious at first, like it had to check whether the ground was stable again. But I didn't join them. I stayed in my seat, watching the space I'd carved for myself by simply existing with truth. That's when it happened. A soft buzz from my clutch. I pulled it out, checked the screen, and for a split second my breath caught, not from nerves, but from the weight of precision. Pentagon com, secure line. Then my phone rang and the entire table froze. The screen glowed in my hand. Gray text, crisp and centered. Pentagon com, secure line. No ringtone, just the vibration, persistent and sharp, slicing through the ambient buzz of silverware and soft music. At first, no one paid attention, just another phone buzzing in a sea of devices. But when I tilted it slightly, letting the light catch the seal at the top of the screen, a few eyes drifted toward me. A second later, someone at a neighboring table whispered, "Is that real?" The clinking stopped. Conversations dimmed to murmurs. Evelyn, seated 3 tables ahead, stiffened like she'd swallowed something sour. Vera turned her head slowly, lips parted mid-laugh. Dean didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply stood, quiet and unhurried, tucking the phone closer to my chest like it belonged there, which it did. I nodded once to no one in particular, stepped away from my table, and made my way across the ballroom. I passed Evelyn without looking down. She didn't speak. I could feel the tension ripple around her like a silent reprimand. My heels met the tiled floor of the side corridor that led to the patio. The air out there was cooler, cleaner. The sky had darkened completely now, stars just starting to emerge between clouds. I answered the call. A man's voice came through. Calm, steady. "Major Maddox, we're reviewing contingency plans for deployment realignment. Need your input on Q3 resource shifts." I responded like I always did. Clear, efficient, practiced. Acknowledged. I'll upload my notes within the hour. You'll have recommendation pathways from Comstrat within 12 minutes. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't ask why music played faintly in the background, because it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was capable, trusted, respected. We hung up. I let the silence return. A few guests peeked through the glass from inside, pretending not to be watching. I caught one woman whispering behind her palm to her husband. Vera was visible in the reflection, whispering something sharp to Dean, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. And then, standing in that space between the call and whatever came next, I finally exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from something else, like armor that had just finished locking into place. "They tried to silence me," I murmured, watching my own faint reflection. The Pentagon called instead. I turned back toward the hall, walking slower now, not to stall, but to enjoy the shift in gravity around me. When I stepped inside, the air had changed. People sat straighter, voices dropped. No one joked this time. Then I saw him, standing by the main entrance in a full-dress uniform, tall, imposing, familiar. General Harlan Vexler. He wasn't holding a drink. He wasn't making small talk. He wasn't even scanning the crowd. He was looking at me. I didn't break stride. I didn't blink. He gave me the kind of nod reserved for people who've earned more than applause. A subtle gesture that said, "Now it's your turn." And I knew, before he even moved, that the next moment would not be theirs to narrate. The moment I saw General Vexler, I knew the family portrait was about to change. He walked in like thunder dressed in metals and saluted me before saying a word. The room fell into stunned stillness. Even the music, Some jazzy instrumental number drifting through the speakers seemed to fade as if it too recognized the shift in the air. General Harlan Vexler stood tall in his full-dress uniform, the silver of his decorations gleaming under the chandeliers. His boots clicked once against the floor as he approached me with unflinching eyes and the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had never been questioned in his life. When he stopped, he didn't nod. He didn't whisper. He saluted. And then, clearly and without hesitation, "Major Maddox, thank you for your leadership. You saved lives." It wasn't a toast. It was a reckoning. The ripple began slowly, first from the far side of the room. A couple of guests looked around, unsure what they'd missed. Then the heads began to turn. A man lowered his fork. A woman dropped her napkin. And Evelyn dropped her facade. Her face froze in a polite smile she couldn't maintain. The napkin in her lap slipped to the floor, and for once, she didn't scramble to recover it. She was too busy recalibrating. Vera looked like someone had pulled the carpet from beneath her Louboutin heels. Even Dean, whose face rarely betrayed more than mild confusion, looked like he'd been sucker-punched by a truth he couldn't spin. I returned the salute, just once, then lowered my hand. There was no applause, but there was something better. Recognition. As General Vexler walked away, off to the bar, or maybe back to whatever classified event he'd left to show up here, Aunt Winona slipped into the empty chair beside me. She leaned in with a glass of iced tea, eyes scanning the stunned crowd like she was watching a slow-motion car crash. "He doesn't know, does he?" she whispered. I turned my head, brows drawn together. "Know what?" She gave me a look that didn't need explaining. "That Evelyn was the one who tried to block your first star. The ethics complaint?" She said it softly, but the words landed like gunfire. "She thought you were too unstable for command, said it would reflect poorly on the family if your name ended up in headlines for the wrong reasons." My blood didn't boil. It chilled. "She submitted it anonymously," Winona added, "but I saw her draft it. She didn't think I'd remember." "I do," I said quietly. "I've always known." We sat for another moment before I stood. I didn't tell Winona where I was going. She didn't need me to. The hallway to the bridal suite was quieter, the noise of the reception muffled behind thick carpet and closed doors. Evelyn was already inside, seated on a velvet bench beside a window that looked out onto the vineyard. Her hands were folded in her lap, her posture perfect, the very image of control. I didn't knock. She looked up, and something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear, not guilt. Just calculation, the same face she wore at board meetings, funerals, and school conferences. "Lottie, I know it was you," I said, cutting her off. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the folder. Cream-colored, simple. Inside, printed on crisp white paper, was the ethics memo she'd sent 6 years ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had already thinned. "You do." I held it up. Linguistic forensics matched the phrasing patterns, your punctuation, the way you use passive voice, the way you start every paragraph with a softener. "While I respect," or "it may be worth considering, you wrote this." She didn't deny it. She just went quiet. I continued. "That report cost me 18 months of my life. It delayed my promotion. It questioned my integrity. And it came from my mother. I was trying to protect the family," she said finally, the words brittle, like they might crack if she pushed them too hard. "No," I corrected, calm and deliberate. "You were trying to protect the version of the family that looked good in pictures, the one where I didn't exist." She exhaled sharply, her jaw tightening. "You've always been difficult. Difficult is not the same as disobedient, I replied. And even if it were, I earned the right to be both. She looked down, then back up. What do you want from me, Lottie? I slid the folder shut and dropped it back into my bag. Next time you speak my name, I said, stepping toward the door, say the rank first. She opened her mouth again, but I was already gone, and when she tried to regain control one last time, I gave her the only answer she'd understand. The ballroom had begun to empty. Tables were being cleared by quiet staff in black vests. Couples drifted toward the exits, high heels in hand, jackets slung over shoulders. The sound of leftover music and half-hearted laughter echoed like aftershocks in a building that had already collapsed. I was almost to the elevators when I heard her voice behind me. Lottie. I stopped, turned slowly. Evelyn was standing in the corner of the hotel lounge, away from the last flickers of party light. She looked like she'd rehearsed this, posture upright, fingers woven neatly on the small table in front of her. She hadn't changed out of her reception dress, still in pearls, still holding on to some imagined composure. I walked over, not to sit, but to end it. She gestured to the seat across from her. Please, just for a minute. I stayed standing. I assume you're proud of yourself, she said, making a scene like that. No, I replied. I'm proud of surviving it. She gave a short, tight smile. Lottie, let's not do this now. There are still guests in the hotel. People talk. I nodded. They always have. Just not about the truth. I didn't come here to argue, she added, more quickly now. I just wanted to ask you not to prolong this. You've said your piece. There's no need to make this public or political. We can deal with things quietly, as a family. Quietly, as a family. The same way they dealt with my father's will, the same way they dealt with every sacrifice I made, the same way she filed that complaint with the ethics board, quietly. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a document folder. No theatrics, just paper and truth. I laid it on the table, slid it forward. She didn't touch it, but her eyes followed the motion like it was a loaded weapon. You remember this? I asked. I don't know what you think. It was sent to the board anonymously, but the phrasing, the sentence structure, the way you punctuate and hedge with qualifiers like perhaps and for consideration, it's yours. I had it reviewed. Forensic linguistics, 93% match. She said nothing. You sent this, I continued, when I was up for my first star, said I was emotionally unstable, that my decision-making under pressure might reflect poorly on the department. You included details only someone in this family would know, things never written down, and you made sure no one questioned it by signing nothing at all. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I was trying to protect you from becoming something you couldn't walk back from. You were angry all the time. You were reckless. You didn't understand what kind of power you were being handed. No, I said. You were trying to protect the version of this family that only worked if I stayed silent. She flinched, not visibly but inward. I knew her well enough to catch it. I was scared, she whispered, almost to herself. So was I answered. But I showed up anyway. A long pause passed between us, a full beat of stillness. Then she said, You don't know what it's like, watching your child become a stranger. And you don't know what it's like, I said, to become invisible so your mother can keep pretending she raised someone else. The lights above us buzzed faintly. Somewhere in the distance, an elevator dinged. I picked up the folder and tucked it away. You don't get to rewrite this anymore. Not my story, not my name. I turned to go. Her voice came again, smaller now. Lottie. I didn't stop. Her hand reached, hovering, but it never made contact. Just air. And I walked away. I never looked back. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally free. It had been 2 months since that night in Fredericksburg. Since the folder. Since the silence. Since the last time Evelyn spoke my name without a title. Back in Arlington, things moved forward without me having to push. I wasn't reassigned. I was recentered. Quietly. No parade, no press release. Just people doing what needed doing and expecting me to do the same. That kind of trust is its own kind of honor. One morning, I sat in my office overlooking the parade field, a folder of new postings open in front of me. A colonel from Public Affairs had slid a recommendation my way, advisory role to the Joint Civilian-Military Council. High profile, safe, applauded by the right people. I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't need a podium. I needed purpose. The next day, I drafted the initial concept for what would become the Resilience Foundation. A place for service members whose wounds didn't come from war zones, but from the dinner tables they were pushed away from, the ones who had been betrayed not by strangers, but by their own blood. Funding came slowly, but word traveled fast. A few quiet phone calls, one late-night message from a journalist I'd once briefed, and then a PBS interview aired on a Wednesday evening. In it, I never once said my mother's name. I didn't need to. 2 days later, a card arrived in my base mailbox. Handwritten. I saw the segment, "I'm sorry I didn't see you before." Mom. I didn't respond. Some things don't need answering. Some things are answers. Weeks passed. The foundation launched with a soft ribbon cutting at a satellite office outside D.C. Veterans came. Civilians, too. No one asked me for quotes or posed photos. They just shook hands like something had been understood without saying it. Then, one Thursday morning, I was in line at the base cafeteria, half awake, thinking about how to structure a workshop on rebuilding professional reputation after internal complaints. I was pouring burnt coffee into a paper cup when a young man behind the counter leaned in. "You don't know me," he said, voice low. "But I was in that convoy, Helmand. You rerouted us. We were sitting ducks. You saved us." I blinked, trying to place the moment, but I couldn't. He smiled like he didn't expect me to. "Just wanted to say thank you, ma'am, that's all." I looked at him, maybe 24, hair cropped tight, hands that fidgeted more than they should have for someone serving eggs. He wasn't looking for a speech. He was giving one. I nodded once. That was all he needed. All I did, too. Later that day, I walked along the Potomac. The early morning sun was slanting off the water, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to stand at attention for it. I just watched it move. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd built. I didn't get the family I needed, but I became the kind of person I wish they'd seen. And that was enough. They called it disobedience. I call it survival. Sometimes the loudest form of love is silence, and sometimes it's the absence of love that teaches us how to stand up, speak out, and choose peace on our own terms. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, or if you've carried a truth too heavy to say aloud, this story is for you. What would you have done if your own parents asked you to hide who you are? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life family stories that cut deep and heal slow.